When a billionaire CEO's world collides with a desperate father's fight for his dying daughter, their forbidden alliance will expose a conspiracy that could destroy them both or forge an unbreakable bond stronger than blood. Welcome to our channel. This is a story about power, sacrifice, and the lengths we'll go to for love. Before we dive into this emotional roller coaster, please comment below with your city so we can see how far our story travels around the world. Your support means everything to us. Let's begin this incredible journey together. The golden hour cast long shadows across Manhattan's financial district as Evelyn Drake emerged from the towering glass monument that bore her family's name. Drake Industries, a pharmaceutical empire worth $47 billion, hummed with the quiet efficiency that only absolute power could command. At 34, Evelyn had transformed her late father's modest research company into a global titan, her ice-blue eyes and razor-sharp intellect, leaving competitors trembling in boardrooms from New York to Tokyo. Her Louboutin heels clicked against the marble lobby with military precision, each step echoing the calculated rhythm of a woman who had never known defeat. The black Armani suit she wore wasn't just clothing, it was armor perfectly tailored to conceal the scars of a childhood spent fighting for respect in a world that dismissed women as decorative accessories to male ambition. Ms. Drake, her assistant Marcus, practically jogged to keep pace, his tablet clutched against his chest like a shield. "The Tokyo merger documents need your signature before—" "Handle it." Evelyn's voice cut through the air like a blade, not bothering to slow her stride. She had no time for hand-holding, no patience for incompetence. The world moved at her speed or got left behind. The revolving glass doors surrendered to her approach, and she stepped into the crisp October evening. Her black Bentley Mulsanne waited at the curb like a faithful predator, its engine purring with 8 cylinders of barely contained power. The chauffeur, a stoic man named Harrison, who'd served 3 generations of Drakes, stood at attention beside the rear door. "The penthouse, Ms. Drake." His voice carried the refined accent of someone who'd spent decades perfecting the art of invisible service. "Yes, I have calls to make before the Singapore markets open." Evelyn's manicured fingers were already reaching for the door handle when the world exploded into chaos. "Don't get in the car." The voice tore through the evening air like a primal scream, raw with terror and desperation. Evelyn's blood turned to ice as a figure burst from the alley beside the building. A man in janitor's coveralls, his face streaked with sweat and grime, his eyes wild with the kind of fear that only comes from staring death in the face. Liam Cross crashed into the sidewalk scene like a meteor striking Earth. At 28, he possessed the lean, wiry strength of someone who'd spent years hauling trash and mopping floors in the shadow of people who wouldn't spit on him if he were on fire. His dark hair was disheveled, his uniform torn at the shoulder, and his hands were shaking as he pointed at the Bentley with naked horror. "The car, there's a—" His words dissolved into gasping breaths as Harrison and 2 security guards materialized from nowhere, their hands already reaching for weapons concealed beneath expensive suits. "Step away from Ms. Drake." Harrison's command boomed across the street, drawing stares from pedestrians, who suddenly found themselves in the middle of what looked like an assassination attempt. But Liam wasn't backing down. Even as the guards closed in, even as Evelyn herself took an instinctive step backward, he kept pointing at the Bentley with the desperate urgency of a man watching his entire world crumble. "Ma'am, please, you have to listen to me." His voice cracked with emotion, and for one impossible moment, Evelyn found herself actually looking into his eyes. What she saw there made her stomach drop into freefall, not the calculated madness of a terrorist, but the raw, primal terror of a father who had nothing left to lose. "There's a bomb in your car." The words hit the street like a physical force, sending ripples of panic through the growing crowd. Harrison's hand froze halfway to his concealed weapon. The security guards exchanged glances that spoke volumes about training scenarios they'd hoped never to face. And Evelyn felt her perfectly ordered world tilt on its axis as she stared at this stranger who'd just torn her life in half with 5 simple words. "Sir, step away from the vehicle and put your hands where we can see them." The voice belonged to NYPD Detective Ray Morrison, his service weapon drawn but not yet pointed, as he approached with the careful steps of someone who'd seen too many situations go south in the blink of an eye. Liam raised his hands, but his eyes never left Evelyn's face. "I'm not armed. I'm trying to save her life." "How do you know about a bomb?" Evelyn's voice was steady, controlled, but inside her chest, her heart was hammering against her ribs like a caged bird. This was impossible. Her security was perfect, her routine unpredictable, her enemies known and accounted for. A janitor shouldn't know anything about anything, let alone because I helped plant it. The confession hung in the air like a death sentence. Harrison's weapon was fully drawn now. The security team had formed a protective circle around Evelyn, and somewhere in the distance, sirens were beginning to wail their approach. But all Evelyn could see was Liam's face, the way his jaw trembled with barely suppressed emotion, the way his eyes held depths of pain that money couldn't touch. "You're going to want to call the bomb squad," Liam continued, his voice growing stronger now that the truth was out. "It's a pressure-sensitive device attached to the driver's seat. The moment anyone sits down, you've got maybe 30 seconds before..." He didn't need to finish. The implications were clear enough to turn Evelyn's blood to liquid nitrogen. If she'd gotten into that car, if Harrison had started driving. Why? The question escaped her lips before she could stop it. "Why plant a bomb and then warn me?" Liam's laugh was bitter, broken. "Because my daughter is dying and the people who hired me promised they could save her. But I saw what they really are, and I can't. I won't let them turn me into a murderer." The bomb squad arrived like something out of an action movie. Black SUVs screeching to a halt, tactical units deploying with military precision hazmat suits and detection equipment, spreading across the street like an invasion force. Within minutes, the entire block had been cordoned off, businesses evacuated, and Evelyn found herself sitting in the back of a police cruiser, watching her life disintegrate through bulletproof glass. "We've confirmed the device," came the voice through Detective Morrison's radio. "Sophisticated work. C4 plastic explosive pressure trigger, just like he said. This wasn't some amateur hour operation." Evelyn closed her eyes and tried to process what was happening. Someone had tried to kill her. Someone with resources, connections, and the kind of technical expertise that didn't come cheap. But who her enemies were corporate rivals, not terrorists. Her security was designed to handle industrial espionage, not assassination attempts. "Ms. Drake," Detective Morrison slid into the seat beside her, his weathered face creased with concern. "I need to ask you some questions." "Of course." Evelyn's voice sounded strange to her own ears, too calm for someone who'd just escaped death by seconds. "Though I have to say, Detective, this is somewhat outside my usual experience." Morrison's smile was grim. "I imagine it is. Can you think of anyone who might want to hurt you? Business rivals, disgruntled employees, anyone with access to your schedule?" Evelyn considered the question carefully. "Detective, when you're worth $47 billion, everyone wants something from you. But wanting me dead, that's counterproductive. Dead, I'm worthless to them." "What about personal relationships? Romantic entanglements? Family disputes?" The question hit closer to home than Morrison could possibly know. Evelyn's personal life was a carefully guarded secret, her romantic relationships non-existent by design. Love was a luxury she couldn't afford, a weakness that competitors would exploit without mercy. But family. My brother, she said quietly. Michael, he's been sick for 3 years. A rare degenerative condition called Hoffman-Larson syndrome. There's no cure, no treatment. She paused, struggling with words she'd never spoken aloud. He's dying, detective, and I've spent the last 2 years and approximately $800 million trying to save him. Morrison's eyebrows rose. That's a lot of money. It's not enough. Evelyn's voice was flat, emotionless. When someone you love is dying, detective, no amount of money is ever enough. Through the cruiser's window, she could see Liam Cross being led away in handcuffs, his head down his shoulders, shaking, with what might have been ops or laughter. Something about the sight made her chest tighten with an emotion she couldn't name. What did he mean about his daughter? She asked suddenly. Morrison consulted his notes. Liam Cross, 28, single father. Works nights cleaning office buildings, including yours. His daughter Emma is 6 years old, currently in the pediatric ICU at Mount Sinai with... He paused, squinting at his handwriting. Hoffman-Larson syndrome. The world went silent. Not quiet silent, as if someone had suddenly sucked all the sound out of existence. Evelyn felt her carefully constructed walls crumble as the impossible coincidence slammed into her like a physical blow. That's not possible, she whispered. Ma'am, the syndrome. It's incredibly rare, fewer than 50 documented cases worldwide. The odds of 2 children in the same city? She couldn't finish the sentence. The mathematical impossibility of it made her head spin. Maybe that's why they targeted you, Morrison suggested. This Cross fellow, he's desperate to save his kid. Someone offers him a way to do that in exchange for helping them get to you. But Evelyn wasn't listening anymore. Her mind was racing, connecting dots that painted a picture too horrifying to contemplate. Someone knew about Michael. Someone knew about her research project. Someone was using dying children as weapons, and she'd just become the target. I need to see him, she said suddenly. Ma'am, Liam Cross. I need to speak with him now. Morrison shook his head. That's not going to happen, Ms. Drake. He's a suspect in an attempted assassination. You're the victim. There are protocols. Detective, Evelyn's voice carried the steel that had built an empire. That man just saved my life. He could have let me die, collected whatever payment they promised him, and used it to help his daughter. Instead, he chose to warn me, knowing it would destroy any chance he had of getting that money. I need to understand why. 20 minutes later, Evelyn found herself in the sterile, fluorescent hell of an NYPD interrogation room, staring across a metal table at the man who'd turned her world upside down. Liam looked smaller under the harsh lights, younger, but his eyes still held that devastating combination of desperation and determination that had stopped her heart on the street. You didn't have to do this, he said quietly, not meeting her gaze. I know you probably think I'm just another criminal, but tell me about Emma. The words hit him like a slap. His head jerked up, eyes wide with surprise, and something that might have been hope. I know she has Hoffman-Larson syndrome. I know she's dying. I know you'd do anything to save her. Evelyn leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. I know because I have someone dying of the same thing. For a moment, they simply stared at each other across the table, 2 people from completely different worlds, united by the most primal force on earth, love for family. My brother Michael, Evelyn continued, diagnosed 3 years ago. I've spent every resource I have trying to find a cure, but the research is... She shrugged helplessly. It's like trying to solve a puzzle when half the pieces don't exist yet. Liam's hands were shaking again. They said they had a cure. The people who hired me. They showed me documents, test results, things that looked legitimate. They said all I had to do was help them get to you, and they'd give Emma the treatment she needed. Who were they? I don't know. Really, I swear I don't know. They contacted me through an encrypted message on my phone. Said they knew about Emma, knew I was desperate. The meeting was in an abandoned warehouse in Queens. 3 people in expensive suits, faces I'd never seen before. Evelyn felt ice forming in her veins. Describe them. 2 men, 1 woman. The woman did most of the talking, blonde, maybe 40, with these cold eyes that looked right through you. One of the men was older, gray hair scar on his left hand. The other was younger, nervous, kept checking his watch. The description meant nothing to Evelyn, but the methodology was familiar. Corporate espionage at its finest, anonymous contacts, untraceable communications, desperate people exploited as disposable assets. Someone was playing a very sophisticated game, and somehow she'd become the primary target. What exactly did they want you to do? Liam's voice was barely audible. Plant the device in your car. Make sure you were alone when you got in. They said it would just be a warning, something to scare you into backing off whatever research you were doing. But when I saw the bomb, he shook his head. That wasn't a warning device. That was meant to kill you. And you decided to warn me instead. I couldn't let them turn me into a murderer. Emma's sick, but she's not dead. If I'd let you die tonight, I'd have been no better than the disease that's killing her. The raw honesty in his voice hit Evelyn like a physical force. She was used to people lying to her, manipulating her, trying to extract something valuable from every interaction. But Liam Cross, this janitor, who'd risked everything to save a stranger, was telling her the absolute truth, and it was breaking her heart. They mentioned my research specifically, said you were working on something that could interfere with their business interests. They didn't give details, but Liam hesitated, then pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. They gave me this. Said if I had any doubts about what needed to be done, I should read it. Evelyn unfolded this paper with trembling fingers. What she saw made her blood turn to ice water. It was a medical report, a detailed analysis of Michael's condition, including test results that should have been locked behind multiple layers of security at her private research facility. But more than that, it contained projections, treatment protocols, and experimental data that didn't match anything her team had produced. This is impossible, she breathed. What is it? This report. It's about my brother, but the information is wrong. The treatment protocols, the test results, none of this matches our actual research. She looked up, her eyes wide with growing horror. Liam, I think someone is using my brother as a test subject without my knowledge. The implications hit them both at the same time. Someone had infiltrated her research facility. Someone was conducting unauthorized experiments on Michael. Someone was using his illness as a weapon against her. We have to get to him, Evelyn said, standing so quickly that her chair scraped against the floor. If they're doing this to Michael, they could be doing it to Emma too. But before Liam could respond, the interrogation room door burst open. Detective Morrison stood in the doorway, his face grim. Ms. Drake, I need you to come with me, now. What's wrong? We just got word from your security team. Someone broke into your research facility 20 minutes ago. They took your brother. The world tilted sideways. Evelyn felt her knees buckle as the full scope of the conspiracy crashed down on her. This wasn't just about killing her, it was about Michael, about the research, about something bigger and more terrifying than a simple assassination attempt. They have him, she whispered. Ma'am? But Evelyn wasn't talking to Morrison anymore. She was looking at Liam, seeing her own desperation reflected in his eyes. Two parents, two dying children, two people who'd just realized they were fighting the same war. "They have my brother," she repeated louder this time. "And I think they have your daughter, too." Liam's face went white. "Emma's at the hospital. She's safe." "Call them," Evelyn commanded. "Call Mount Sinai. Ask to speak to Emma Cross in the pediatric ICU." With shaking hands, Liam dialed the number. Evelyn watched his face change as he spoke to the nurse, watched hope transform into horror, watched a father's world collapse in real time. "She's gone," he whispered, the phone slipping from nerveless fingers. "They said she was transferred to a private research facility for experimental treatment. 2 hours ago." Evelyn felt something cold and deadly settle in her chest, a rage so pure and focused that it scared her. Someone had taken Michael. Someone had taken Emma. Someone was using sick children as pawns in a game she didn't understand. But she was about to make them understand something you don't steal from Evelyn Drake and live to tell about it. "Detective Morrison," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd never been denied anything she truly wanted. "I need you to release Mr. Cross into my custody." "That's not going to happen, Ms. Drake. He's still a suspect. He saved my life. He's the only person who's had contact with the people responsible for this. And right now, he and I have the same goal, getting our children back safely." She turned to face Morrison directly, and he took an involuntary step backward at the intensity in her eyes. "I'm offering to post whatever bail is necessary, provide whatever security guarantees you require, and personally guarantee that Mr. Cross will be available for any further questioning. But I need him with me. Now." Morrison looked from Evelyn to Liam and back again, clearly recognizing that he was witnessing something far beyond his experience. These weren't just victim and suspect anymore. They were two people who'd just declared war on whoever had taken their family. "This is highly irregular. Detective..." Evelyn's voice was soft, but it carried the weight of $47 billion and 3 generations of political influence. "My brother is dying of an incurable disease. Mr. Cross's daughter is dying of the same disease. Someone has taken them both, and that someone just tried to kill me to cover their tracks. You can either help us get them back, or you can explain to your superiors why you obstructed a billionaire from rescuing kidnapped children." 20 minutes later, Evelyn and Liam walked out of the police station together. The night air felt different now, charged with electricity, heavy with possibility and danger. Behind them, Detective Morrison was already making phone calls, putting together a task force that would officially handle the investigation. But Evelyn knew that official channels moved too slowly, followed too many rules. Children were dying. Her brother was missing. Emma Cross was missing. Official was about to become a luxury she couldn't afford. "Why are you helping me?" Liam asked, as they climbed into the back of an armored sedan that had materialized from somewhere in Evelyn's vast network of resources. Evelyn considered the question as Manhattan blurred past the bulletproof windows. Why was she helping him? It would have been easier to let the police handle everything, to retreat behind her walls of money and security while the authorities sorted things out. But when she looked at Liam, Cross really looked at him, she saw something that had been missing from her life for longer than she cared to admit. She saw someone who understood what it meant to love someone more than your own life. Someone who'd risk everything for family, as someone who'd choose to do the right thing even when it cost him everything. "Because," she said finally, "for the first time in my life, I'm not fighting this battle alone." The sedan purred through the night, toward an uncertain destination, carrying 2 unlikely allies toward a confrontation that would either save their families or destroy them all. Neither of them realized they were driving toward a revelation that would change everything they thought they knew about love, sacrifice, and the true price of saving the people you love most. The war for Michael and Emma's lives had just begun. The armored sedan cut through Manhattan's arteries like a predator stalking prey, its destination still unknown but its purpose crystal clear. Inside the vehicle's leather-wrapped sanctuary, Evelyn felt the familiar weight of command settling over her shoulders, but this time it was different. This time she wasn't commanding boardrooms or corporate mergers. She was commanding a war. "Where are we going?" Liam's voice carried the edge of a man balanced on a knife's blade between hope and despair. His hands hadn't stopped shaking since they'd left the police station, and Evelyn found herself studying his profile in the passing streetlights. There was something about him, a rawness, an authenticity that her world of calculated smiles and strategic friendships had never offered. "My private research facility," Evelyn replied, her fingers already dancing across her phone's screen. "If someone's been conducting unauthorized experiments on Michael, there will be evidence. Security footage, access logs, something that can tell us who we're dealing with." The phone connected on the first ring. "Dr. Sarah Chen speaking." "Sarah, it's Evelyn. I need you at the lab immediately. We have a situation." A pause. "Evelyn, it's nearly midnight. Is everything—" "Michael's been taken. Someone broke into the facility and kidnapped him." The words felt like glass in her throat. "I need you to access all security systems, check every database, review every piece of data from the past 6 months. Someone's been using our research for their own purposes." "My God. Evelyn, I'm so sorry. I'll be there in 20 minutes. As the call ended, Liam shifted in his seat. "Tell me about your brother." The question caught Evelyn off guard. In her world, personal information was currency, something to be hoarded and protected. But looking at Liam, this janitor who'd risked everything to save a stranger, she felt her defenses crumbling like ancient walls. "Michael is 3 years younger than me." She began, her voice softer than she'd intended. "When our parents died in a car accident 10 years ago, he was all I had left. He's everything good about our family that I'm not. Kind, gentle, trusting. He sees the best in people even when they don't deserve it." "Sounds like Emma," Liam said quietly. "She still believes in fairy tales even in the hospital. Still thinks her daddy can fix anything." The parallel hit Evelyn like a physical blow. "How long has she been sick?" 8 months. Started with fatigue, then the muscle weakness, then—" Liam's voice broke. "The doctors said she had maybe 6 months left. That was 2 months ago." Evelyn closed her eyes, remembering Michael's diagnosis. The gradual deterioration, the failed treatments, the desperate search for anything that might buy him more time. The disease progresses differently in children. Faster, more aggressive. Emma probably doesn't have long. "That's why I agreed to help them," Liam said, his words barely audible. "When they showed me those documents, when they said they could save her, I would have done anything. I thought I was saving my daughter's life." "You were manipulated by professionals," Evelyn said firmly. "They found your weakness and exploited it. That doesn't make you a criminal, it makes you a father." The sedan pulled into the underground garage of Drake Industries' research complex, a gleaming fortress of science and technology, hidden beneath the streets of Lower Manhattan. As they emerged from the vehicle, Evelyn felt the weight of familiarity wash over her. This place had been her second home for 3 years, every laboratory and corridor mapped in her memory by countless midnight visits to check on Michael's progress. But tonight, it felt different, violated. The pristine hallways seemed to echo with invisible footsteps, and every shadow held the potential for betrayal. "Jesus," Liam breathed as they entered the main laboratory. "This place is incredible." The facility was a monument to desperation disguised as scientific advancement. State-of-the-art equipment worth hundreds of millions of dollars lined the walls, each machine representing another attempt to cheat death, another hope that money could buy what love alone couldn't provide. In the center of it all stood Michael's treatment area, or what had been Michael's treatment area. Now it was a crime scene yellow tape and evidence markers scattered like confetti across her carefully ordered world. Ms. Drake. Dr. Sarah Chen emerged from the data center, her usually perfect composure cracked with exhaustion and concern. At 42, Sarah was one of the world's leading experts in genetic therapy, lured away from Johns Hopkins with a salary that could have funded a small country's healthcare system. But more than that, she was Michael's doctor, and the pain in her eyes told Evelyn everything she needed to know about how seriously she took that responsibility. Sarah, this is Liam Cross. His daughter has the same condition as Michael. Evelyn gestured toward Liam, who was staring at the medical equipment, with the wonder of someone seeing miracles made manifest. They took her too. Sarah's expression darkened. Then this isn't random. Someone specifically targeted families dealing with Hoffman-Larson syndrome. What have you found? Evelyn asked. Nothing good. Sarah led them to the central monitoring station, where multiple screens displayed security footage, medical records, and data streams that painted a picture of systematic infiltration. Someone's been accessing our systems for weeks, maybe months. They've copied every piece of research we've conducted, every treatment protocol we've developed. How is that possible? Evelyn's voice carried the steel of someone who'd never accepted failure as an option. Our security is military grade. It was an inside job, Sarah said grimly. The access codes, the timing, the specific files they targeted, whoever did this, had intimate knowledge of our procedures. They knew exactly what they were looking for. Liam stepped closer to the screens, his eyes widening as he processed the implications. They've been planning this for months. Longer than that. Sarah continued pulling up a series of medical reports. I've been analyzing the data they accessed, and there's something disturbing. They weren't just copying our research, they were modifying it. Look at this. The screen filled with side-by-side comparisons of treatment protocols. To Evelyn's trained eye, the differences were subtle but significant: dosage modifications, timing adjustments, the addition of experimental compounds that had never been approved for human testing. They've been using our legitimate research as cover for their own experiments, Sarah explained, taking our proven safe treatments and adding their own untested elements. Using sick children as test subjects. Evelyn said, her voice deadly quiet. It gets worse. Sarah's fingers flew across the keyboard, bringing up another set of files. These are the medical records for 12 children with Hoffman-Larson syndrome from around the country. All of them have disappeared from their hospitals in the past 6 months. All of them were taken by people claiming to offer experimental treatment. Liam's face had gone pale. 12 children. Michael and Emma make 14. Evelyn said, the full scope of the conspiracy crystallizing in her mind. Someone is running a large-scale human experimentation program, using dying children as subjects. But why? Liam asked. What could they possibly gain from everything? Evelyn interrupted, her mind racing through the possibilities. Hoffman-Larson syndrome affects the nervous system in ways that mimic dozens of other conditions. If you could find a cure or even a treatment that slows progression, you'd have the foundation for treating Parkinson's, ALS, Huntington's disease, multiple sclerosis. We're talking about a potential market worth hundreds of billions of dollars. Sarah nodded grimly. And if you're willing to use children as test subjects, you can accelerate research that would normally take decades. No ethics committees, no safety protocols, no regulatory oversight. Jesus Christ, Liam whispered. They're using our kids as lab rats. The rage that had been building in Evelyn's chest finally found its voice. We're going to find them, she said, her words carrying the weight of an oath sworn in blood. We're going to find them, get our children back, and make sure these monsters never hurt another family. How? Liam asked. We don't even know who they are. Actually, Sarah interjected, we might have a lead. She pulled up another screen, this one showing financial records and corporate documents. I've been tracking the modified research protocols back to their source. The additional compounds they've been adding, they're not available through normal pharmaceutical suppliers. They're experimental, restricted, the kind of thing you can only get through very specific channels. What kind of channels? Evelyn asked. Black market biotech. There are maybe 5 companies in the world that deal in that level of restricted research materials. 3 of them are overseas, one is in California and one… Sarah paused, her face grave. One is right here in New York. Which one? Meridian Biosystems. They're a shell company technically, but they've got connections to some very questionable research operations. The kind of place that would sell experimental drugs to anyone with enough money and no ethics. Evelyn felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. Address, Industrial District in Queens. But Evelyn, if these people are desperate enough to kidnap children, they're not going to just hand them back because we ask nicely. I'm not planning to ask nicely, Evelyn said, her voice carrying a promise of violence that made both Sarah and Liam take a step back. I'm planning to take them back. Liam moved closer to Evelyn, and she could feel the heat radiating from his body. Despite everything, the fear, the desperation, the impossible circumstances, she found herself acutely aware of him as a man. The way his jaw clenched when he was angry, the way his eyes softened when he talked about Emma, the way his presence made her feel less alone than she had in years. I'm going with you, he said simply. Liam, this could be dangerous. My daughter is in there. He interrupted, his voice carrying a father's absolute determination. Whatever they're doing to her, whatever twisted experiments they're running, I'm not leaving her in that hell for 1 second longer than necessary. Evelyn looked into his eyes and saw her own reflection, not the billionaire CEO, not the ice queen of corporate America, but a woman who would burn the world down to save someone she loved. In that moment, something shifted between them, some fundamental understanding that transcended their different worlds and circumstances. Sarah, I need you to coordinate with the police, Evelyn said, not breaking eye contact with Liam. Give them everything we've found, but make sure they understand that time is critical. These children don't have days or weeks, they have hours. What about you? Sarah asked. We're going to Meridian Biosystems. If that's where they're holding Michael and Emma, we need to know the layout, the security, everything we can about what we're walking into. Sarah grabbed Evelyn's arm. You can't just storm in there. If they really are conducting illegal experiments, they'll have security, maybe armed guards. You could get yourselves killed. Then we better be smarter than they are, Evelyn replied. She turned to Liam, studying his face in the harsh laboratory lighting. Are you sure about this? Once we leave here, there's no going back. We'll be operating outside the law, taking risks that could get us both killed. Liam's answer came without hesitation. I was a dead man the moment they took Emma. At least this way I die trying to save her. The intensity in his voice sent a shiver through Evelyn's body. She'd spent her entire adult life surrounded by men who spoke in boardroom platitudes and calculated risks. But Liam Cross spoke in absolutes, in the kind of raw truth that could only come from a heart that had nothing left to lose. 30 minutes later, they were back in the armored sedan, racing through the pre-dawn darkness toward Queens. Evelyn had changed from her business suit into tactical clothing, black cargo pants, steel-toed boots, and a fitted jacket that concealed the 380 pistol she'd retrieved from her office safe. She'd learned to shoot at her father's insistence, but she'd never imagined she'd need the skill to rescue her own brother. Beside her, Liam had traded his janitor's uniform for similar tactical gear provided by Evelyn's security team. The transformation was startling. Gone was the desperate maintenance worker who'd burst onto the street hours earlier. In his place sat a man who moved with quiet purpose, whose eyes held the focused intensity of someone preparing for war. "Tell me about Emma," Evelyn said, as they navigated the industrial wasteland of Queens. "What's she like?" Liam's expression softened. She's magic. Even sick, even in pain, she finds ways to make other people smile. Last week, she convinced the nurses to let her organize a tea party for the other kids in the pediatric ward. There, she was barely able to walk, but she insisted on serving everyone else first. "She sounds like Michael," Evelyn said quietly. "He started a reading program for the other patients when he was strong enough. Said if he was going to be stuck in a hospital bed, he might as well make it educational." "How long have you been taking care of him?" 10 years, since our parents died." Evelyn stared out the window at the passing warehouses and industrial complexes. "I was 24, he was 21. I thought I was ready to handle anything but losing them." She shook her head. "Michael kept me sane, kept me human. Without him, I probably would have become exactly the kind of monster who could justify experimenting on children." Liam reached across the seat and touched her hand. The contact was electric, sending jolts of sensation up her arm that had nothing to do with fear or adrenaline. "You're not a monster, Evelyn. Monsters don't risk everything to save people they've never met." "I'm not doing this for strangers," she replied, not pulling her hand away. "I'm doing this for Michael, and for Emma, and maybe—" She paused suddenly, aware of how close he was, how his thumb was tracing gentle circles on her knuckles. "Maybe for you." The admission hung in the air between them like a live wire. Evelyn couldn't believe she'd said it, couldn't believe she was allowing herself to feel something for this man in the middle of the worst crisis of her life. But there was something about Liam Cross that bypassed all her carefully constructed defenses, something that made her want to be more than just the ice queen who conquered corporate boardrooms. "Evelyn," Liam's voice was rough with emotion. "When this is over, when we get them back," she said firmly, "we'll have all the time in the world to figure out what this is." The sedan slowed as they approached their destination. Meridian Biosystems occupied a nondescript warehouse complex that could have housed anything from legitimate pharmaceutical research to illegal arms manufacturing. From the outside, it looked abandoned. Broken windows, rusted fire escapes, parking lots choked with weeds. But Evelyn's trained eye caught the details that marked it as anything but abandoned. The subtle gleam of cameras positioned at strategic angles, the two clean loading docks, the faint hum of ventilation systems that suggested extensive underground facilities. "This is it," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "They're here, I can feel it." Liam squeezed her hand. "Whatever happens in there, we stick together. No heroics, no splitting up. We find the kids and we get out." "Agreed." Evelyn checked her weapon one final time, then looked at Liam with an intensity that made her chest tight. "Liam, if something goes wrong—" "Nothing's going wrong," he said firmly. "We're going to save them, both of them. And then we're going to make sure the people responsible for this never hurt another family." As they prepared to enter the warehouse that held their children and possibly their own fates, Evelyn realized that somewhere in the space of a few hours, her world had changed completely. She was no longer the untouchable CEO who solved problems with money and power. She was a woman in love fighting alongside a man who'd shown her what it meant to put everything on the line for the people you care about. The war for Michael and Emma's lives was about to begin in earnest. But as Evelyn looked at Liam Cross, really looked at him, she realized they weren't just fighting for their children anymore. They were fighting for each other. The warehouse loomed before them like a sleeping giant, its broken windows staring down at the pre-dawn streets with the empty gaze of a predator. Evelyn felt her heart hammering against her ribs as she and Liam approached the building's perimeter, every shadow potentially concealing armed guards or surveillance equipment. The weight of the pistol against her hip was both comforting and terrifying, a reminder that the next few hours would determine whether they saved their children or joined them in whatever hell lay beyond those walls. "There," Liam whispered, pointing toward a section of fence that had been cut and poorly repaired. "Service entrance. If they're trying to keep this place looking abandoned, they wouldn't want delivery trucks using the main entrance." Evelyn studied the gap in the chain-link fencing, her mind automatically calculating risks and contingencies. In the corporate world, she'd learned to anticipate every possible outcome to have backup plans for her backup plans. But this wasn't a boardroom negotiation where the worst consequence was a failed merger. This was life and death, and the variables were spiraling beyond anything she could control. "Once we're inside, we stay low and quiet," she said, checking her phone's signal one last time. "Sarah's team is monitoring police frequencies. If we're not out in 2 hours, they'll send in backup." 2 hours. Liam repeated, his voice tight with the kind of tension that came from a father imagining what could happen to his child in 2 hours. Emma's already been in there for God knows how long. What if we're too late? What if they've already... "Don't!" Evelyn's command was sharp enough to cut through his spiraling panic. "Don't go there. Not now. We focus on the mission, we find them, and we bring them home. Everything else is just noise." Liam nodded, but she could see the way his hands trembled as he checked his own weapon, a tactical knife that Evelyn's security team had provided, along with a crash course in close-quarters combat. The idea of this gentle man, this father who organized tea parties for sick children, having to use a blade against another human being, made her stomach clench with nausea. They slipped through the fence like ghosts, their black clothing blending seamlessly with the industrial shadows. The loading dock was exactly as Evelyn had predicted, too clean, too well-maintained for an abandoned building. Fresh tire tracks in the concrete spoke of recent deliveries, and the subtle hum of electrical systems suggested that whatever was happening inside required significant power. "Ventilation system." Liam pointed toward a series of ducts that ran along the building's exterior. "If they're conducting medical experiments, they'll need controlled air filtration. Follow the ducts and we'll find the laboratory." Evelyn looked at him with new respect. "How do you know that?" "I've cleaned every medical facility in Manhattan," he replied grimly. "You learn things when you're invisible, when people talk around you like you're not there. Hospital administrators discussing construction projects, doctors complaining about ventilation problems. When you're desperate to understand your daughter's illness, you absorb everything." The observation hit Evelyn like a physical blow. For 3 years, she'd thrown money at Michael's condition, hiring the best doctors, building the most advanced facility, surrounding herself with experts. But Liam had learned about medical facilities by mopping their floors, by being invisible while the real world conducted its business around him. There was something both heartbreaking and beautiful about that level of dedication, that willingness to extract knowledge from the humblest circumstances. They followed the ductwork around the building's perimeter until they reached a section where the ventilation intake was larger, more sophisticated. The air emerging from the system carried the distinctive smell of medical antiseptic mixed with something else, something that made Evelyn's trained nose wrinkle with recognition. "Chemical processing," she whispered. "They're not just running medical experiments, they're manufacturing something." The service door was locked, but Evelyn's security team had prepared for that contingency. The electronic lockpick made quick work of the mechanism, and within seconds, they were inside the building's outer shell. The interior was a maze of corridors and storage areas that had been retrofitted to conceal the real operation. Through the walls, they could hear the distant hum of machinery and the occasional echo of voices. "This way." Liam pointed toward a corridor that led deeper into the building. "The airflow is stronger in that direction." They moved through the shadows like predators stalking prey, every sense hyper-alert for signs of detection. Evelyn found herself acutely aware of Liam's presence beside her, the way he moved with surprising stealth, despite his size, the way his breathing remained controlled, even though she knew his heart was racing as fast as hers. The corridor opened into a larger space that had been converted into a reception area of sorts. Corporate-style furniture and motivational posters created an illusion of legitimacy, but Evelyn's eyes were drawn to the security checkpoint that blocked access to the deeper areas of the facility. Two guards sat behind bulletproof glass, their attention focused on a bank of monitors that showed feeds from cameras throughout the complex. 12 screens, Evelyn counted quietly. 3 levels, multiple rooms per level. If they're holding children here, it's a larger operation than we thought. Liam's jaw tightened as he studied the monitor feeds. "There," he breathed, pointing to one of the screens. "Lower level, 3rd room from the left. Is that?" Evelyn followed his gaze and felt her blood turn to ice. The grainy security footage showed a medical bed with a small figure lying motionless beneath white sheets. Even through the poor resolution, the distinctive strawberry blonde hair was unmistakable. "Emma," Liam whispered, his voice breaking with relief and terror in equal measure. On another monitor, Evelyn spotted a different room with another occupied bed. The figure was larger, older, but something about the way he held his shoulders even while lying down was achingly familiar. "Michael," she said, her own voice barely audible. For a moment, they simply stared at the screens, watching their children through the cold, digital medium of surveillance cameras. Both Michael and Emma appeared to be unconscious, connected to IV lines and monitoring equipment that painted them more as test subjects than patients. "They're alive," Liam said, and Evelyn could hear him fighting back tears. "Jesus Christ, they're alive. But for how long?" Evelyn's trained eye caught details in the footage that made her stomach clench. The medical equipment was sophisticated, but wrong, designed for research rather than treatment, for gathering data rather than providing care. "We need to move. Now." The security checkpoint presented a problem that money couldn't solve and corporate influence couldn't navigate. 2 armed guards, bulletproof glass, and certainly alarm systems that would bring reinforcements within minutes. Evelyn found herself looking at the situation through the lens of someone who'd spent her entire career solving impossible problems. But this wasn't a business challenge that could be overcome with strategy and resources. "I have an idea," Liam said quietly, "but you're not going to like it." "Tell me." "I go in through the front. Tell them I'm here to check on Emma, that I'm having second thoughts about the arrangement. While they're dealing with me, you find another way to the lower level." Evelyn stared at him in horror. "That's suicide. The moment they see you, they'll know something's wrong." "Maybe. Or maybe they'll see exactly what they expect to see: a desperate father who's realized he's made a terrible mistake." Liam's eyes held a determination that was both admirable and terrifying. "Evelyn, we're not going to overpower their security. We're not going to sneak past their cameras, but we might be able to outsmart them. And if they decide to kill you instead of talking, then you get Michael and Emma out of here and make sure these bastards pay for what they've done." Liam reached out and cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle despite the calluses on his palms. "But that's not going to happen, because you're going to be my backup, and together we're going to save our kids." The intimacy of the gesture caught Evelyn completely off guard. Standing in the shadows of a warehouse that housed unspeakable horrors with their children's lives hanging in the balance, she found herself drowning in the depth of feeling in Liam's eyes. This man, this janitor who'd risked everything to warn her about a bomb, was looking at her like she was the most important thing in his world. "Liam," she began, but he silenced her with a finger against her lips. "When this is over," he said softly, "when we have them back safe, I want to take you somewhere beautiful. Somewhere far away from warehouses and hospitals and laboratories. I want to watch you smile without worrying about who's trying to hurt the people you love." The promise was impossible, impractical, completely at odds with the reality of their situation. But in that moment, Evelyn believed in it with every fiber of her being. She believed in him. "Okay," she whispered, "but we both make it out of here, both of us. That's not negotiable." Liam's smile was like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. "Yes, ma'am." They spent the next 10 minutes reviewing the building's layout and identifying Evelyn's infiltration route. A service stairwell led to the lower levels, but it was positioned behind the security checkpoint in a way that would require perfect timing to reach undetected. The margin for error was essentially zero. If the guards spotted her before Liam had their full attention, the entire plan would collapse. "Give me 5 minutes," Liam said, checking his watch. "Then move." "Be careful," Evelyn said, surprised by the intensity of emotion in her own voice. "I just found you. I'm not losing you now." Liam kissed her forehead, a gesture so tender and unexpected that it nearly brought her to her knees. "You're not losing anyone today. I promise." He walked away before she could respond, moving toward the security checkpoint with the measured pace of someone who was either completely confident or completely resigned to his fate. Evelyn positioned herself near the service stairwell and watched through a crack in the wall as Liam approached the guards. "Excuse me," she heard him say, his voice carrying the perfect mixture of nervousness and determination. "I'm here about my daughter, Emma Cross. I need to see her." The guards exchanged glances, and Evelyn could see one of them reaching for a phone. This was it, the moment when their plan would either work or get them both killed. "Sir, you'll need to speak with Dr. Vaughn," one of the guards said. "He's not available until—" "No!" Liam interrupted, his voice rising with perfectly calculated desperation. "You don't understand. I've made a terrible mistake. I let you take my daughter because I thought you could save her. But I've been thinking about it all night, and I can't do this. I can't let you experiment on her. I want her back." The performance was masterful. Evelyn watched as both guards focused their complete attention on Liam, clearly trying to decide whether he represented a threat or simply a change of heart that needed to be managed. One of them was already reaching for a radio, presumably to contact whoever Dr. Vaughn was. That was Evelyn's cue. She slipped from her hiding place and sprinted toward the service stairwell, her heart hammering as she expected shouts of alarm at any second. But the guards were completely absorbed in dealing with Liam's increasingly agitated demands to see his daughter. The stairwell was dimly lit and smelled of industrial cleaning chemicals, a scent that reminded Evelyn painfully of Liam's coveralls when he'd first burst onto the street to save her life. She descended 2 levels before encountering her first real obstacle, a security door that required a keycard to open. But Evelyn Drake hadn't built a $47 billion empire by accepting that doors were meant to stay closed. The electronic lockpick made quick work of the mechanism, and within seconds she was inside the medical facility proper. What she found there made her stomach turn with revulsion and rage. The lower level had been converted into a sophisticated medical research facility, but one that operated by rules that would have horrified any legitimate doctor. Children's beds lined the corridors like a twisted parody of a pediatric ward, each one occupied by a small figure connected to monitoring equipment and IV lines that dripped unknown substances into their bodies. Evelyn counted 14 beds, 14 children, 14 families who had been torn apart by the monsters running this operation. Some of the children were awake, staring at the ceiling with the glassy-eyed look of heavy sedation. Others were unconscious, their small bodies fighting battles they couldn't possibly understand. "Jesus," she whispered, her voice echoing in the sterile corridor. "What have they done to you?" She found Emma's room exactly where the security monitor had indicated. The 6-year-old was unconscious, her breathing steady but shallow, connected to a complex array of medical equipment that was clearly designed for research rather than treatment. Her strawberry blonde hair had been partially shaved to accommodate some kind of neural monitoring device, and her small arms were marked with multiple injection sites. Rage, unlike anything Evelyn had ever experienced, coursed through her body as she looked at this child, Liam's child, being used as a test subject by people who saw her as nothing more than a data point. The fury was so intense that her vision actually narrowed her entire world, focusing down to a laser point of determination to make someone pay for this atrocity. But first, she had to find Michael. She located him 3 rooms down the corridor, and the sight of her brother in the same condition as Emma nearly brought her to her knees. Michael looked thinner than when she'd last seen him, his face pale and drawn in a way that spoke of pain and exhaustion. Like Emma, he was connected to monitoring equipment and IV lines, his body being used to test treatments that legitimate doctors would never approve. "Michael," she whispered, moving to his bedside and taking his hand. "I'm here. I'm going to get you out of here." His eyes fluttered open at the sound of her voice, unfocused but aware. "Evelyn." His voice was barely audible, roughened by whatever drugs they'd been giving him. "How did you—" "Long story," she said, checking the IV lines to see what substances they were pumping into his system. The labels were in some kind of code, but she recognized enough medical terminology to understand that they were using experimental compounds that had never been tested on humans. "Can you walk?" "I think so. They've been doing things, Evie. Injecting me with things, taking samples, running tests." Michael's voice was growing stronger as the fog of sedation began to clear. "There are other kids here. Sick kids like me. I know. We're going to get all of you out of here." Evelyn began disconnecting the monitoring equipment, her hands moving with the efficiency of someone who'd spent years watching medical procedures. "But first, I need to get you and Emma stable enough to move." She returned to Emma's room and began the same process, carefully removing the neural monitoring device and disconnecting the IV lines. The little girl stirred as the sedatives began wearing off, her eyes opening to reveal the same intelligent awareness that Evelyn had seen in Liam's gaze. "Where's my daddy?" Emma asked, her voice small and frightened. "He's here," Evelyn said gently, lifting the child from the bed. "He came to take you home." Emma was lighter than she should have been, her small body clearly weakened by whatever treatments they'd been subjecting her to. But she was alert, responsive, and most importantly, she was alive. The sound of footsteps in the corridor made Evelyn's blood freeze. multiple people moving with the purposeful stride of security personnel or medical staff making rounds. She quickly carried Emma back to Michael's room, where her brother was struggling to sit up on the edge of his bed. "We have company," she whispered. The footsteps stopped just outside the door, and Evelyn heard voices engaged in what sounded like a routine discussion of patient status and treatment protocols. But one voice made her skin crawl with recognition, cultured, educated, and completely devoid of anything resembling human empathy. "Subject 14 is showing promising results from the neural enhancement protocols," the voice was saying. "Subject 7, however, appears to be developing resistance to the cognitive modification treatments." They were talking about children like they were laboratory specimens. Evelyn felt her grip tighten on the pistol at her hip, and for a moment she seriously considered simply walking into the corridor and putting an end to this conversation permanently. "The benefactor is pleased with our progress," another voice replied. "But he's concerned about security. There have been inquiries about some of our subjects. Nothing we can't handle. The families signed the consent forms. Legally, we're protected. And if the families change their minds, then we ensure they understand that their children's lives depend on continued cooperation." The casual discussion of threatening grieving families was the final straw. Evelyn made a decision that would have horrified her corporate lawyers and probably violated a dozen federal laws, but felt absolutely right in the moral universe she now inhabited. She was going to kill every person responsible for this atrocity. But first, she had to get the children to safety. The footsteps moved away down the corridor, giving Evelyn the opening she needed. She helped Michael to his feet, relieved to see that he was stronger than he'd appeared. Whatever they'd been doing to him, it hadn't completely destroyed his physical condition. "Can you carry Emma?" she asked. "Of course." Michael's voice carried the protective instinct of an older brother, even weakened by drugs and exhaustion. "But Evie, there are 12 other kids here. We can't just leave them." "We're not leaving anyone," Evelyn said firmly. "But I need to get you two to safety first, then come back for the others." The journey back to the service stairwell felt like walking through a minefield. Every shadow could hide a security camera. Every sound could bring guards running. Every second increased the risk that their escape would be discovered. But somehow they made it to the stairwell without detection. Michael carrying Emma with a gentleness that broke Evelyn's heart. At the top of the stairs, they could hear Liam's voice still engaged in increasingly heated discussion with the security guards. He was demanding to see Dr. Vaughn, insisting that he wanted to withdraw his consent for Emma's treatment, creating exactly the kind of distraction they needed. "That's my daddy," Emma whispered, her face lighting up, despite her weakness. "Yes, it is," Evelyn replied. "And he's been very worried about you." The reunion happened in the shadows behind the security checkpoint, where Liam's eyes went wide with disbelief and relief as he saw his daughter in Michael's arms. For a moment, he couldn't speak, could only reach out with trembling hands to touch Emma's face as if to convince himself she was real. "Hey, baby girl," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Daddy's here." "I knew you'd come," Emma said simply, the absolute faith in her voice nearly bringing all three adults to tears. But their celebration was short-lived. The sound of alarms began echoing through the building, and red lights started flashing in the corridors behind them. "They've discovered the empty rooms," Michael said grimly. "Time to go," Evelyn said. But even as she spoke, she could hear the sound of multiple vehicles arriving outside the building. "We're not the only ones with backup." Through the windows, they could see black SUVs surrounding the warehouse, tactical teams deploying with military precision. But these weren't police or FBI, The vehicles bore no markings, and the personnel moved with the coordination of private military contractors. "Who are they?" Liam asked. "The benefactor's cleanup crew," Evelyn replied, her mind racing through their rapidly diminishing options. "Whoever's behind this operation, they're not going to let us walk away with evidence of what they've been doing." The warehouse had become a trap with armed personnel outside and the facility's security team closing in from inside. But Evelyn Drake hadn't become one of the world's most powerful women by accepting defeat when the odds were stacked against her. "There's another way out," she said, remembering the building's layout. "The ventilation system we followed to find the laboratory. If it's large enough for air intake, it's large enough for people." They retraced their steps through the building's outer shell, moving as quickly as Michael's condition would allow. Behind them, they could hear shouts and the sound of doors being kicked in as the search teams methodically cleared each room. The ventilation intake was exactly where they'd left it, but climbing through industrial ductwork while carrying a sick child and supporting a weakened adult proved more challenging than any of them had anticipated. The metal surfaces were slick with condensation, the spaces narrow and claustrophobic, and every sound echoed through the system like gunshots. But somehow they made it to the exterior intake, emerging into the pre-dawn air, like miners escaping a collapsed tunnel. The industrial wasteland of Queens stretched around them, offering plenty of places to hide but few options for transportation. "The sedan," Liam said, pointing toward where they'd left Evelyn's armored vehicle. "If we can reach it." They never got the chance to finish the thought. Spotlights suddenly blazed to life around the warehouse perimeter, turning night into day and exposing their position like actors on a stage. Armed figures began moving toward them from multiple directions, weapons, drawn voices shouting commands that were barely audible over the sound of helicopter rotors approaching from the east. "This is it," Evelyn said, checking her weapon one final time. "Whatever happens, we protect the children." Liam nodded, his own knife ready despite the hopeless odds they faced. "Whatever happens." As the tactical teams closed in and the helicopter searchlight found them, Evelyn realized that everything in her life had led to this moment. All the boardroom battles, all the corporate victories, all the billions of dollars, none of it mattered compared to the two children they were trying to protect, and the man standing beside her, ready to die for his daughter's life. The war for Michael and Emma's lives was about to reach its climax, and Evelyn Drake was finally ready to fight a battle that actually mattered. The helicopter's searchlight carved through the pre-dawn darkness like a blade of white fire, pinning them against the industrial wasteland with nowhere to run. Evelyn felt the weight of the pistol in her hand, a laughably inadequate defense against the tactical teams converging on their position with military precision. But as she looked at Liam cradling Emma while Michael leaned heavily against a concrete barrier, she realized that some battles were worth fighting, even when victory was impossible. "Drop your weapons and step away from the children." The amplified voice boomed from the helicopter, but Evelyn could hear something in the tone that made her blood run cold. This wasn't law enforcement trying to rescue kidnapped children. This was a cleanup operation designed to eliminate witnesses. "Like hell," she muttered, raising her pistol toward the nearest tactical team member. The odds were hopeless, but she'd spent her entire life refusing to accept defeat, and she wasn't about to start now. The first shot came from her left, not from the tactical teams, but from a sniper position on top of one of the surrounding warehouses. The bullet sparked off the concrete inches from Liam's head, and Emma screamed in terror as her father threw himself protectively over her small body. "Evelyn." Michael's voice was weak but urgent. "The storm drain behind the loading dock." She followed his gaze and saw it, a maintenance access to the underground drainage system that honeycombed the industrial district. It was their only chance, but reaching it would require crossing 30 yards of open ground under direct fire from multiple positions. "Can you make it?" she asked Michael, who was already struggling to stay upright. "I'll make it," he said grimly. "Just get Emma to safety." "Nobody gets left behind," Liam said firmly, shifting Emma's weight so he could move more quickly. "We all go together or we don't go at all." The second shot shattered the concrete barrier beside them, sending fragments of debris flying like shrapnel. Evelyn realized they had perhaps 10 seconds before the tactical teams completed their encirclement and eliminated any possibility of escape. "Run," she commanded, and they ran. The 30 yards across the loading dock felt like 30 miles under the withering fire of professional soldiers. Bullets whined through the air around them, sparking off metal surfaces and punching craters in concrete with the distinctive crack of high-velocity rounds. Evelyn returned fire as they ran, not expecting to hit anything, but hoping to disrupt the shooter's aim long enough for them to reach cover. Michael stumbled halfway across the open ground, his weakened legs finally betraying him. Without hesitation, Liam shifted Emma to one arm and grabbed Michael with the other, essentially carrying both children the final 15 yards to the storm drain access. The metal grate was locked, but adrenaline and desperation made Evelyn stronger than she'd ever been in her life. She wrenched the barrier aside with her bare hands, not even feeling the pain as the sharp edges cut into her palms. "Go, go, go!" she shouted, pushing Michael and Liam toward the opening, as bullets continued to rain down around them. The storm drain was exactly as nightmarish as she'd expected, a concrete tunnel barely 5 feet high, filled with ankle-deep water that reeked of industrial runoff and decades of urban decay. But it was also salvation, offering them precious minutes of concealment while their pursuers tried to figure out which direction they'd taken underground. "This way," Michael gasped, pointing toward a junction where multiple tunnels intersected. "The drainage system connects to the subway. If we can reach the old, abandoned station." They splashed through the filthy water, their footsteps echoing in the confined space like gunshots. Emma had stopped crying, but was shivering violently from cold fear and whatever drugs they'd been pumping into her system. Liam kept murmuring reassurances to her, his voice steady despite the fact that they were all essentially walking corpses if the tactical teams found their trail. "Daddy," Emma whispered, "are the bad men going to hurt us?" "No, baby," Liam replied without hesitation. "The bad men are never going to hurt you again, I promise." It was a promise he had no right to make given their circumstances, but Evelyn found herself believing in the absolute certainty of his voice. This man who'd risked everything to save a stranger, who'd infiltrated a criminal facility to rescue his daughter, who was now carrying 2 sick children through a sewer to escape armed killers, this man made promises he intended to keep. The tunnel junction opened into a larger chamber where multiple drainage lines converged before flowing toward the East River. The space was lit by emergency lighting that cast grotesque shadows on the curved walls, and the sound of their breathing echoed like whispers in a cathedral. "We need to stop," Michael said, leaning heavily against the concrete wall. "I can't. I need a minute." Evelyn could see that her brother was reaching the limits of his endurance. The combination of whatever drugs they'd been testing on him and the physical exertion of their escape was taking a devastating toll. His face was gray with exhaustion, and his breathing was labored in a way that spoke of serious medical distress. "How far to the subway?" she asked. "Maybe half a mile through the main tunnel," Michael replied. "But there's another problem: the water level. If it's been raining upstream, the tunnel could be flooded." As if summoned by his words, they could hear the distant sound of rushing water echoing through the drainage system. Somewhere upstream, massive volumes of liquid were flowing toward them through pipes and tunnels that had been designed to handle normal rainfall, not the kind of torrential downpour that could turn the entire underground network into a death trap. "How long do we have?" Liam asked. "Minutes," Michael said grimly. "Maybe less." The sound of voices echoing through the tunnel they'd just traversed made the decision for them. The tactical teams had found their trail and were following them into the drainage system with the methodical persistence of professional hunters. "We move now," Evelyn said, helping Michael to his feet. "Whatever's waiting for us downstream, it can't be worse than what's behind us." They plunged deeper into the tunnel system, following the main drainage line toward what they hoped would be salvation. The water level was rising steadily from ankle-deep to mid-calf to knee-deep in the space of 10 minutes. Emma had to be carried above the water line, and Michael was struggling to maintain his footing on the slippery concrete bottom. "There," Liam pointed ahead to where a maintenance ladder disappeared up through the ceiling toward what looked like another access point. "That has to lead to the subway level." The ladder was ancient, its metal rungs corroded by decades of moisture and industrial pollutants. But it was also their only hope of escape before the rising water made the tunnel completely impassable. Evelyn went first, testing each rung to make sure it would support their weight. The climb was only 20 feet, but it felt like scaling Mount Everest with Michael weakened by drugs and Emma barely conscious from whatever treatments she'd endured. The ladder terminated in another tunnel, but this one was different, wider, better ventilated, and with the distinctive curved walls that marked it as part of the old subway system. Emergency lighting cast a dim glow that seemed brilliant after the darkness of the storm drains, and the air carried the faint scent of oil and metal that spoke of trains and civilization. "The abandoned station should be about 200 yards east," Michael said, leaning against the tunnel wall as he caught his breath. "From there we can access the active subway lines." "And then what?" Liam asked, shifting Emma's weight again. "Even if we reach the surface, they'll be waiting for us. They've got resources, manpower connections. Where can we go that they won't find us?" Evelyn considered the question as they made their way through the subway tunnel. Liam was right. Whoever was behind the medical experimentation program clearly had access to significant resources and the kind of political connections that could make evidence disappear and witnesses suffer unfortunate accidents. But there was one place they might be safe, one person who had the power and influence to protect them while they figured out how to expose the conspiracy. "My mother's house," she said suddenly. "Your mother—" Liam looked confused. "I thought your parents were dead." "My adoptive mother," Evelyn clarified. "Senator Patricia Hawthorne. She and my father were business partners before she went into politics. When our parents died, she became Michael's and my legal guardian. She's got a secure compound in upstate New York, and she's got the political connections to make sure this story gets told to the right people." The abandoned subway station appeared ahead of them like a relic from another era, ornate tilework, covered in decades of grime-rusted turnstiles that hadn't seen passengers since the 1940s, and platforms that stretched into darkness beyond their field of vision. But more importantly, it connected to the active subway system through a maintenance tunnel that would allow them to reach the surface without emerging directly into their pursuers' search grid. "We'll have to move fast once we reach street level," Evelyn said as they made their way through the maintenance tunnel. "They'll have surveillance on all the major transportation hubs, but if we can reach Grand Central—" The sound of metal clanging against metal echoed through the tunnel behind them. The distinctive sound of the storm drain access being forced open. Their pursuers had followed them through the drainage system and were now closing the gap with the relentless efficiency of professional trackers. "They're persistent," Michael observed with grim humor. "They're protecting a billion-dollar operation," Evelyn replied. "We've seen their facility. We've rescued their test subjects, and we can expose everything they've been doing. From their perspective, we're the most dangerous people in the world right now." The maintenance tunnel opened onto an active subway platform, where the first morning commuters were beginning to gather for the day's journey into Manhattan. The normalcy of the scene, people checking their phones, drinking coffee, complaining about train delays, felt surreal after the nightmare they'd just escaped. "We need different clothes," Liam said, looking down at their tactical gear and Emma's hospital gown. "We look like exactly what we are, fugitives on the run." Evelyn spotted a maintenance worker at the far end of the platform, a woman about her size wearing coveralls and a utility vest. Without hesitation, she approached the worker, with the kind of commanding presence that had served her well in boardrooms around the world. "Excuse me," she said, pulling out her wallet and extracting a stack of $100 bills. "I need to buy your clothes." The maintenance worker stared at the money with faint eyes. "Lady, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but—" "No game," Evelyn interrupted, pressing the bills into the woman's hand. "Emergency situation. There's $3,000 there. All I need is your coveralls and vest." 5 minutes later, they were dressed like transit workers, with Emma wrapped in Liam's jacket to conceal her hospital gown. The disguise wasn't perfect, but it was enough to blend in with the morning crowd as they boarded the first train toward Grand Central. The subway car was packed with commuters, their faces buried in newspapers and phones, completely oblivious to the fact that they were sharing their morning commute with 2 kidnapped children and the people who'd rescued them from a medical experimentation facility. Evelyn found herself studying the other passengers, wondering how many of them had families, wondering if any of them would have done what she and Liam had done if their children were in danger. "We need to call Senator Hawthorne," she said quietly, checking her phone for signal. "Let her know we're coming and make sure she's prepared for what we're bringing her." The call connected after 3 rings, and Evelyn felt a wave of relief wash over her as she heard the familiar voice of the woman who'd raised her after her parents' death. "Evelyn, my God, where are you? I've been watching the news about the bombing attempt. Are you safe?" "I'm safe, but I need help," Evelyn said, keeping her voice low to avoid attracting attention from other passengers. "I'm coming to the compound with Michael and 2 other people. There's been a kidnapping, illegal medical experimentation, and people are trying to kill us to cover it up." A pause. "How serious is this?" "Congressional investigations serious. Federal prosecutions serious. The kind of serious that ends careers and puts people in prison for the rest of their lives." "I'll have security prepare for your arrival," Senator Hawthorne said without hesitation. "And Evelyn, whatever you've uncovered, we'll make sure the right people hear about it. You have my word." Grand Central Terminal loomed ahead of them like a cathedral of transportation, its soaring ceilings and marble floors designed to inspire awe in the millions of travelers who passed through its corridors each year. But for Evelyn, it represented something much simpler, the first step towards safety for the children they'd rescued, and justice for the monsters who'd been using those children as test subjects. They emerged from the subway into the main concourse, where the morning rush hour was building toward its daily crescendo. Thousands of people moved through the space with the choreographed precision of urban life, each person focused on their own destination and completely unaware of the drama unfolding around them. "Car service," Evelyn said, leading them toward the taxi stands. "I've got a driver who's been with my family for 15 years. He's discreet and he's loyal." The phone call was brief and coded a request for pickup that would sound like routine business to anyone listening, but would tell the driver that this was an emergency situation requiring maximum security protocols. 10 minutes, she told the others as they waited in the relative anonymity of the crowded terminal. Emma had been quiet throughout their escape, But now she looked up at Evelyn with the kind of intelligent awareness that reminded her painfully of Michael at that age. "Are you my daddy's girlfriend?" she asked innocently. The question caught Evelyn completely off guard. She looked at Liam, who was studying her face with an expression that was half amused and half hopeful. Evelyn began, then realized she had no idea how to answer. What were they to each other? They'd known each other for less than 24 hours, but they'd been through more together than most couples experienced in a lifetime. They'd saved each other's lives, rescued each other's family members, and faced death together in the tunnels beneath Queens. "Yes," Liam said quietly, his eyes never leaving Evelyn's face. "She's very special to me." The simple declaration sent warmth flooding through Evelyn's chest. In the middle of Grand Central Terminal, surrounded by thousands of strangers and hunted by people who wanted them dead, she felt something she'd never experienced before, the absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. "And you're very special to me," she replied, her voice soft enough that only Liam could hear. The moment was interrupted by the arrival of their driver, a silver-haired man named James, who'd been driving for the Drake family since Evelyn was in college. His face showed no surprise at their unusual appearance, or the fact that they were traveling with a sick child, but his eyes held the alert wariness of someone who understood that this was not a routine pickup. "Ms. Drake," he said formally, "where shall I take you?" "The senator's compound," Evelyn replied. "And James, we may be followed. Drive like our lives depend on reaching our destination safely." "Understood, ma'am." The armored sedan pulled away from Grand Central with the smooth acceleration of German engineering and American security modifications. But as they merged into Manhattan traffic, Evelyn caught sight of two black SUVs that seemed to be matching their movements with suspicious precision. "We've got company," she said quietly. James checked his mirrors and nodded grimly. "I see them. Hold on." What followed was a car chase that belonged in an action movie rather than the streets of New York City. James drove with the skill of someone who'd been trained in defensive driving by the same people who protected heads of state, using the city's traffic patterns and road construction to his advantage as he attempted to lose their pursuers. The SUVs stayed with them through the urban maze of Manhattan, but their drivers were clearly struggling with the challenge of conducting a high-speed pursuit through morning rush-hour traffic without attracting attention from law enforcement. "The Queensboro Bridge," James said, taking a hard right that threw them all against the passenger door. "If I can reach the bridge, I can lose them in the construction zone." Emma whimpered as the sedan's tires squealed around a corner, and Liam held her closer, while murmuring reassurances that everything would be okay. Michael was gripping the door handle with white knuckles, his face pale but determined, as their escape vehicle wove through traffic at speeds that would have terrified a NASCAR driver. The bridge approach was a nightmare of orange cones and concrete barriers, but James navigated the construction maze like he'd memorized every lane closure and traffic pattern. Behind them, the SUVs were falling further back as their drivers struggled with the constantly changing road conditions. "We're clear," James announced as they reached the far side of the bridge. But ma'am, whoever those people were, they had resources. Professional drivers, coordinated communications, the kind of equipment that suggests serious backing. "I know," Evelyn said grimly. "That's why we need to reach the senator's compound. It's the only place where we'll be safe long enough to figure out our next move." The compound was exactly what Evelyn remembered from her childhood, a sprawling estate in the Hudson Valley that had been designed to look like a traditional country home but was actually a fortress equipped with security systems that would have impressed the Secret Service. Senator Patricia Hawthorne had built her political career on being prepared for any contingency, and her personal security reflected that philosophy. Evelyn. The senator emerged from the main house as their car pulled up the circular driveway, her silver hair perfectly styled, despite the early hour, and her expression showing the kind of controlled concern that came from decades in politics. Thank God you're safe. When Patricia Hawthorne was 72 years old, but moved with the energy of someone half her age, she'd been a formidable presence in Evelyn's life since her parents' death, providing the kind of guidance and support that had helped shape a grieving young woman into one of the world's most powerful CEOs. Senator, Evelyn said, climbing out of the sedan with Emma in her arms, I'd like you to meet Liam Cross and his daughter Emma. And you remember Michael? Of course. Senator Hawthorne's eyes took in their disheveled appearance and Emma's obvious medical condition with the rapid assessment of someone who'd spent decades reading situations and people. Let's get everyone inside. You can tell me what's happened once we're secure. The compound's main house was a masterpiece of understated elegance, antique furniture, and original artwork, creating an atmosphere of cultured sophistication that spoke of old money and political influence. But Evelyn's attention was focused on the subtle security features that marked it as anything but a typical country home. Safe room in the basement, Senator Hawthorne said quietly as they settled in the main living room. Secure communications, independent power supply, enough supplies to last 2 weeks if necessary. But let's hope it doesn't come to that. Evelyn spent the next hour recounting everything that had happened since Liam had burst onto the street to save her life. The bomb in her car, the discovery of Michael's kidnapping, the infiltration of the medical facility, the children they'd found being used as test subjects, all of it spilled out in a torrent of anger and disbelief that left Senator Hawthorne's face growing increasingly grim. 14 children. The senator repeated, her voice carrying the controlled fury of someone who'd spent her political career fighting for child welfare. 14 families terrorized and manipulated by people conducting illegal medical experiments. It gets worse, Evelyn said. The documents we found suggest this is just one facility. There may be others scattered across the country, all conducting the same kind of research, using dying children as test subjects. Senator Hawthorne stood and walked to the window, staring out at the grounds, while processing the implications of what she'd heard. The FBI will need to be involved, obviously. The Department of Health and Human Services, probably a joint task force with multiple agencies. What about the children who are still in that facility? Liam asked. While we're organizing task forces and coordinating agencies, those kids are still being used as lab rats. The facility will be raided within the hour, Senator Hawthorne assured him. I'm calling the director of the FBI personally, but Liam, you need to understand that the people behind this operation have resources and connections. They won't just surrender because we've exposed one location. As if summoned by her words, the sound of helicopters echoed across the estate. But instead of the unmarked aircraft that had hunted them through Queens, these bore the distinctive markings of federal law enforcement agencies. Our backup has arrived, Senator Hawthorne said with satisfaction. Evelyn, I want you and your friends to tell your story to every federal agent, congressional investigator, and journalist I can assemble. By the time we're finished, the people responsible for this atrocity will be facing charges that will put them away for the rest of their lives. But even as law enforcement vehicles surrounded the compound and federal agents began the process of documenting their evidence, Evelyn found herself focusing on something much more personal than justice for criminals. She was watching Liam with Emma, seeing the way he held his daughter with infinite gentleness while she slept peacefully for the first time in months. The medical team that Senator Hawthorne had assembled was already working to reverse the effects of whatever experimental treatments Emma had endured, and the early signs were encouraging. Michael, too, was responding well to legitimate medical care after the nightmare of being used as a test subject. The color was returning to his face and his breathing was stronger than it had been in weeks. "They're going to be okay," Senator Hawthorne said quietly, following Evelyn's gaze. "Both of them. The doctors say whatever these monsters were doing, they didn't cause permanent damage." "What about the other children?" "The FBI raided the facility 2 hours ago. All 12 remaining children have been rescued and are receiving medical care. Their families are being reunited with them as we speak." The relief was overwhelming, but it was tempered by the knowledge that justice was still a long way off. The people behind the medical experimentation program were still out there, still dangerous, still capable of causing unimaginable harm to other families. But for now, in this moment, the children were safe. Emma was sleeping peacefully in her father's arms. Michael was receiving proper medical care for the first time in months, and 12 other families were being reunited with the children they thought they'd lost forever. "What happens next?" Liam asked, his voice soft to avoid waking Emma. "Next," Evelyn said, moving closer to him until she could feel the warmth of his body. "We make sure these monsters never hurt another child. And then—" She paused, surprised by the certainty in her own voice. "And then we figure out what comes after happily ever after." Liam's smile was like sunrise breaking through storm clouds. "I like the sound of that." As federal agents continued their work around them, and the machinery of justice began turning toward the people who'd tried to destroy their families, Evelyn realized that she'd found something more valuable than all the money and power she'd accumulated over the years. She'd found love real and deep and transformative. She'd found purpose beyond profit margins and market share. And she'd found the kind of family that was built not on blood or obligation, but on choice and sacrifice and the willingness to risk everything for the people you love. The war for Michael and Emma's lives was over, but the battle for their future, all their futures, was just beginning. The morning sun cast golden light through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Senator Hawthorne's compound as federal agents continued their methodical documentation of evidence that would ultimately dismantle one of the most horrific medical experimentation networks in American history. But for Evelyn, watching Liam gently stroke Emma's hair as she slept peacefully in his arms, the real victory wasn't measured in arrests or prosecutions. It was measured in the steady rise and fall of a little girl's breathing free from the poison of experimental drugs for the first time in months. The preliminary lab results are back. Dr. Martinez, the pediatric specialist, Senator Hawthorne, had flown in from Johns Hopkins, approached them with the kind of cautious optimism that medical professionals learned to perfect when dealing with desperate families. Both children are responding well to the detoxification protocols. Whatever compounds they were given, we're successfully flushing them from their systems. Michael, propped up on the living room couch with color returning to his cheeks for the first time in weeks, managed a weak smile. "Does that mean the nightmare is finally over?" "The medical nightmare is over," Dr. Martinez confirmed. "But Michael, you need to understand that your underlying condition, the Hoffman-Larson syndrome, hasn't changed. We're back to where we started 3 years ago in terms of treatment options." The words should have been devastating, but Evelyn found herself feeling something she hadn't experienced since Michael's initial diagnosis: hope. Not hope for a miracle cure or a magic bullet that would make the disease disappear, but hope for time, precious, irreplaceable time to spend with the people she loved. "How much time?" she asked directly. "Hard to say definitively," Dr. Martinez replied. "The progression has been slowed somewhat by the experimental treatments, ironically. If we can maintain that deceleration through legitimate medical approaches, we're looking at years, not months." Years. The word hung in the air like a promise, like a gift that none of them had dared to imagine just 24 hours earlier. Years to watch Emma grow up, to see her start school and make friends, and discover what kind of person she wanted to become. Years for Michael to write the novel he'd always talked about, to travel to the places he'd dreamed of seeing, to simply exist as himself rather than as a patient fighting a losing battle against an incurable disease. "Agent Sarah Chen wants to debrief you again," Senator Hawthorne said, approaching their small group with the measured stride of someone who'd spent decades navigating crisis situations. "The FBI has made significant progress in tracking down the network's financial backing." Financial backing. Liam looked up from Emma, his expression darkening. "You mean there's more than just the medical facility?" "Much more," Senator Hawthorne confirmed grimly. "The operation you uncovered was funded by a consortium of pharmaceutical companies and private investors who were essentially betting against legitimate research timelines. They were trying to accelerate drug development by decades through illegal human experimentation." Evelyn felt the familiar burn of rage in her chest. "They were gambling with children's lives to corner the market on treatments for neurological diseases." "Exactly. And the potential profits?" Senator Hawthorne shook her head. "We're talking about treatments that could be worth hundreds of billions of dollars globally. The Hoffman-Larson research was just the beginning. They were planning to expand into Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, ALS, every major neurological condition." "How many people knew?" Evelyn asked, her voice carrying the steel that had built an empire and could just as easily tear one down. "How many people were complicit in turning sick children into lab rats?" "The FBI has identified at least 47 individuals across 12 states who were directly involved in the operation," Senator Hawthorne replied. "Doctors, administrators, security personnel, financial advisors. The conspiracy goes deep, Evelyn. Deeper than any of us imagined." Agent Chen appeared in the doorway, her expression carrying the grim satisfaction of someone who'd spent the night assembling a case that would destroy lives and careers with surgical precision. "Ms. Drake, Mr. Cross, if you're ready, I'd like to walk you through what we've uncovered." The next 2 hours were a masterclass in the mechanics of institutional evil. Agent Chen laid out a network of corruption that stretched from legitimate pharmaceutical companies to offshore shell corporations, from respected medical institutions to private military contractors who specialized in making problems disappear permanently. The mastermind behind the operation was Dr. Marcus Vaughn, Agent Chen explained, spreading photographs and documents across the conference table. "He's a former NIH researcher who was stripped of his medical license 10 years ago for conducting unauthorized experiments on terminal patients. But instead of disappearing, he went underground and started building this network." Evelyn studied the photograph of a distinguished-looking man in his 60s, with silver hair and the kind of cultured appearance that inspired trust in medical settings. "This is the man who was experimenting on Michael, and on Emma and on 14 other children whose only crime was being born with a rare disease that made them valuable test subjects," Agent Chen confirmed. "But here's the good news. We arrested him 3 hours ago at a private airfield in New Jersey. He was trying to flee the country with approximately $40 million in cryptocurrency and enough research data to start the entire operation over again somewhere else." "What about the other children?" Liam asked, his voice tight with the kind of controlled emotion that came from a father who'd seen too much suffering. "The ones who were in the facility, are they okay?" "All 12 have been rescued and are receiving medical care," Agent Chen assured him. "Their families are being reunited with them as we speak. And Mr. Cross, thanks to your decision to warn Ms. Drake instead of completing the assassination, we were able to trace the network's communications and shut down 2 additional facilities in California and Texas before they could destroy evidence or harm more children." The weight of that revelation settled over Liam like a physical force. His decision to save a stranger's life had ultimately saved dozens of children from the nightmare of illegal medical experimentation. How many more kids would have suffered if you hadn't made that choice? Emma asked softly, her voice weak but clear as she looked up at her father with the kind of love that could move mountains. Too many, Liam replied simply, pressing a gentle kiss to his daughter's forehead. Way too many. As the debriefing continued, Evelyn found herself studying the faces around the table, federal agents who'd worked through the night to rescue children they'd never met, medical professionals who'd dropped everything to provide care for victims of an atrocity they could barely comprehend, politicians who'd put their careers on the line to ensure justice was served. But mostly, she found herself watching Liam Cross, this janitor, who'd saved her life and stolen her heart in the space of a single day. There was something about the way he held Emma, the way he listened to every detail of the investigation with the focused intensity of someone who needed to understand how close they'd all come to losing everything that made her chest tight, with an emotion she was still learning to name. "What happens now?" she asked Agent Chen as the formal debriefing concluded. "Now we build the case," Agent Chen replied. "Congressional hearings, federal prosecutions, civil lawsuits that will destroy everyone who profited from this operation. Dr. Vaughn is facing charges that will put him in federal prison for the rest of his life, and everyone who worked with him is going to face similar consequences. And the children get to go home. They get to heal. They get to have the childhoods that were stolen from them." Agent Chen's expression softened as she looked at Emma, who was finally sleeping peacefully without the aid of sedatives or experimental drugs. They get to be kids again instead of test subjects. As the afternoon wore on and the formal investigation continued around them, Evelyn realized that something fundamental had shifted in her understanding of what mattered in life. For 34 years, she'd measured success in terms of profit margins and market share and corporate victories and competitive advantages that ultimately meant nothing to anyone except shareholders and business journalists. But watching Liam with Emma, seeing the way Michael's eyes lit up when he talked about the book he wanted to write, witnessing Senator Hawthorne use her political influence to protect children instead of advancing legislation, this was what success actually looked like. This was what victory meant when the stakes were measured in human lives rather than quarterly earnings. "Evelyn." Senator Hawthorne approached her as the sun began setting over the Hudson Valley. "I've been thinking about what you said earlier, about the research that you've been conducting on Michael's condition. What about it? $800 million over 3 years, the most advanced medical facility in the world, the best doctors money can hire." Senator Hawthorne's eyes held the calculating intelligence that had made her one of the most effective politicians of her generation. What if we took all of that expertise and funding and applied it to helping other families dealing with rare diseases? What if we created something legitimate and ethical that could accomplish what these monsters were trying to do through illegal experimentation? The idea hit Evelyn like lightning, illuminating possibilities she'd never considered. A research foundation, properly funded, ethically managed, focused on diseases that affect children. Exactly. You have the medical infrastructure. I have the political connections to cut through regulatory red tape, and together we could create something that actually helps families instead of exploiting them. Evelyn looked around the room at Michael discussing literature with one of the FBI agents, at Emma, showing another agent how to braid hair, at Liam, watching his daughter with the kind of fierce protectiveness that came from nearly losing her, and felt pieces of her future clicking into place with the same precision that had once guided her corporate strategies. "The Drake Cross Foundation for Pediatric Research," she said, suddenly surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. Liam's head turned at the sound of his name, his eyes widening with surprise. "Evelyn, you don't have to—" "Yes, I do," she interrupted, moving to sit beside him on the couch, where Emma was curled up between them like a bridge connecting their worlds. "Liam, what we've been through, what we've survived together, it changed everything for me. My priorities, my understanding of what really matters, my definition of family." She took his hand, intertwining their fingers with the kind of intimacy that felt both natural and revolutionary. "I want to build something with you. Not just a foundation or a research facility, but a life. A real life together, where we wake up every morning knowing that we're making the world better for children like Emma and Michael." Liam's eyes held depths of emotion that made her breath catch in her throat. "Are you sure, Evelyn, our worlds are so different? You're a billionaire CEO and I'm a janitor who cleans office buildings. What could we possibly have in common? We both know what it means to love someone more than our own lives," she replied simply. "We both know what it means to risk everything for family. And we both know what it feels like to fight battles that seem impossible to win." Emma stirred between them, her eyes opening to reveal the kind of innocent wisdom that only children possessed. "Daddy, are you going to marry Evelyn?" The question hung in the air, like a challenge, like an invitation, like a promise that none of them had dared to voice aloud. Evelyn felt her heart hammering against her ribs as she looked at this man who'd turned her world upside down in the space of 24 hours. "Would you want me to?" Liam asked his daughter seriously, treating her question with the respect it deserved. "She saved us," Emma replied with the absolute certainty that came from a 6-year-old's understanding of justice and fairness. "She could have let the bad men take us, but she didn't. She fought for us even though she didn't know us. That means she loves us, right?" "Yes," Evelyn said softly, looking into Emma's eyes and seeing the future she'd never dared to imagine. "That means I love you, both of you, more than I ever thought it was possible to love anyone." "Then yes," Emma declared, with the authority of someone who'd survived medical experimentation and underground tunnels and helicopter chases. "Daddy should definitely marry you." Liam's laughter was rich and warm, filling the room with the sound of joy that had been absent from their lives for far too long. "Well, when you put it like that—" He turned to face Evelyn directly, his eyes holding a mixture of love and hope and determination that made her feel like she was seeing the sun rise for the first time. "Evelyn Drake, I know we've only known each other for one day, but it's been the most important day of my life. You saved my daughter, you saved me, and you showed me what it means to fight for something bigger than yourself." "Liam, I'm not finished," he said with a smile that made her heart flutter like a teenager's. "I love you. I love your strength, your compassion, your willingness to risk everything for the people you care about. I love the way you look at Emma, like she's already your daughter. And I love the way you've never given up on Michael, even when the doctors said there was no hope." He reached into his pocket and pulled out something that made Evelyn's breath catch in her throat, a simple gold ring that had clearly been worn smooth by years of handling. "This was my mother's ring," he said quietly. "She died when I was 12, but she made me promise to give this to the woman I wanted to spend the rest of my life with." He looked into Evelyn's eyes with an intensity that made the rest of the world disappear. "Evelyn Drake, will you marry me?" The proposal was impossible, impractical, completely at odds with every rational consideration that should have governed such a decision. They'd known each other for one day. Their backgrounds were completely different. The logistics of blending their lives would be complicated beyond belief. But looking at Liam Cross, this man who'd saved her life, who'd shown her what real courage looked like, who'd taught her that love was something worth fighting for, Evelyn realized that rationality was overrated. "Yes," she said, without hesitation, her voice carrying the absolute certainty of someone who'd finally found what she'd been searching for her entire life. "Yes, I'll marry you." The ring slipped onto her finger like it had been made for her, like destiny had been waiting 34 years for this moment to arrive. Emma clapped her hands with delight. Michael smiled with the kind of happiness that made his illness seem irrelevant. And Senator Hawthorne watched the scene unfold with the satisfaction of someone who'd spent her career making impossible things happen. "So," Senator Hawthorne said with barely concealed amusement, "I suppose we'll need to plan a wedding along with launching a medical research foundation and testifying before Congress about a criminal conspiracy." "The wedding can wait," Evelyn said, not taking her eyes off Liam's face. "The foundation can't. There are too many families out there dealing with what we've been through, too many children who need help that legitimate medical research can provide." "Actually," Liam said, with the kind of mischievous smile that suggested he was about to upend her expectations once again, "I have a different idea about the timing." "Oh, Emma's been in a hospital for 8 months, fighting a disease that's been stealing her childhood one day at a time. Michael's been through 3 years of the same thing. They've seen enough of sickness and sadness and uncertainty." He looked at both children with infinite tenderness. "What if we gave them something beautiful to remember? What if we got married right here, right now, with our family around us and the promise of better days ahead?" The suggestion was crazy spontaneous, completely at odds with the kind of elaborate wedding that someone of Evelyn's social position would typically require. But looking around the room, at Emma's eager face, at Michael's hopeful expression, at Senator Hawthorne's approving nod, she realized that this was exactly the kind of family she wanted to build. "Senator," she said formally, "I don't suppose you're licensed to perform wedding ceremonies." "As a matter of fact," Senator Hawthorne replied with the kind of political preparedness that had served her well throughout her career, "I am indeed qualified to officiate weddings in the state of New York, one of the lesser-known perquisites of elected office." The ceremony that followed was nothing like the elaborate society wedding that Evelyn's wealth and status would typically demand. There were no hundreds of guests in designer gowns, no orchestra or catered reception, or photographers documenting every moment for society magazines. Instead, there was Michael serving as best man, despite his weakness, Emma as maid of honor. Despite her hospital gown, Senator Hawthorne officiating with the dignity of someone who understood the significance of the moment, and a handful of FBI agents serving as witnesses to vows that were spoken from the heart, rather than memorized from tradition. "Do you, Evelyn Marie Drake, take Liam Michael Cross to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, for as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Evelyn said, her voice carrying the weight of a promise that encompassed everything they'd survived together and everything they hoped to build together. "And do you, Liam Michael Cross, take Evelyn Marie Drake to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, for as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Liam replied, his eyes never leaving Evelyn's face as he spoke the words that bound their lives together. "By the power vested in me by the state of New York, I now pronounce you husband and wife." Senator Hawthorne's smile was radiant as she delivered the words that made it official. "Liam, you may kiss your bride." The kiss was gentle, tender, full of promise and hope, and the kind of love that could survive anything the world might throw at them. When they finally broke apart, Emma was clapping enthusiastically, and Michael was wiping tears from his eyes. Are we a family now? Emma asked with the directness that only children could manage. We've been a family since the moment your daddy decided to save my life, Evelyn replied, lifting Emma into her arms with the natural ease of someone who'd been born to be a mother. The wedding just made it official. 6 months later, Evelyn stood in the main laboratory of the Drake Cross Foundation for Pediatric Research, watching Dr. Sarah Chen brief a team of researchers who were working on legitimate ethical treatments for Hoffmann-Larsen syndrome and dozens of other rare childhood diseases. The facility was everything the underground laboratory had pretended to be: cutting-edge technology, brilliant minds, unlimited resources, all dedicated to helping children instead of exploiting them. The clinical trials are showing remarkable promise, Dr. Chen was saying, as she reviewed data from their latest research. We're seeing significant improvement in motor function and cognitive development across all age groups. Through the laboratory's windows, Evelyn could see the facility's garden, where Emma was playing soccer with Michael and 3 other children whose families had been affected by rare diseases. Emma's hair had grown back completely, and her laughter carried the kind of unbridled joy that spoke of a childhood reclaimed from medical nightmares. Mrs. Cross. The title still felt new and wonderful even after 6 months of marriage. Evelyn turned to see Dr. Chen approaching with the kind of expression that suggested important news. Yes. The treatment protocol we've developed based on your research, we're ready to begin the next phase of clinical trials. With your permission, we'd like Emma and Michael to be among the first participants. Evelyn felt her heart skip a beat. After everything they'd been through, the idea of submitting their children to any kind of medical experimentation triggered protective instincts that ran deeper than rational thought. Dr. Chen, you understand why that request makes me nervous. Absolutely. But Evelyn, this is different. This is legitimate medical research conducted under full FDA oversight with ethics committees and safety protocols and complete transparency. This isn't what Dr. Vaughn was doing. This is everything he pretended to be doing. Through the window, Evelyn watched Liam join the children's soccer game, his laughter mixing with Emma's, as he missed an easy shot and dramatically fell to the ground in mock defeat. Her husband had left his job cleaning office buildings to become the foundation's director of family services, using his experience as a father, dealing with medical bureaucracy, to help other families navigate the complex world of pediatric research. What does the data show? Evelyn asked. Preliminary results suggest we can slow disease progression by 60 to 70% in most cases. In some children, we're seeing actual improvement in symptoms that we thought were irreversible. 60 to 70%. The numbers represented years of additional life years of watching Emma grow up and Michael pursue his dreams. Years of family dinners and bedtime stories, and all the ordinary miracles that healthy families took for granted. I'll need to discuss it with Liam, Evelyn said, and with Emma and Michael. They get to make this choice for themselves. Of course. Take all the time you need. That evening, as they sat around the dinner table in their new home, a sprawling house in Westchester that was large enough for their blended family and close enough to the foundation for daily commutes, Evelyn brought up Dr. Chen's proposal. Clinical trials. Emma asked her 6-year-old mind, processing the concept with the sophisticated understanding that came from too much experience with medical procedures. Different than what the bad men were doing, Liam assured her. This would be real doctors trying to help you get better with your permission and with all the safety rules that protect children. Would it hurt? Emma asked. Some, Michael said honestly. Medicine usually does hurt a little. But Emma, if there's a chance it could help you feel better, help you stay healthy longer. Emma considered this with the seriousness of someone who'd learned that medical decisions were matters of life and death. Would you do it too? If you wanted me to, yes. Then okay, Emma declared with the matter-of-fact courage that had carried her through months of illegal experimentation. But only if Daddy and Evelyn promised to be with me. Always, Evelyn said, reaching across the table to take Emma's small hand in hers. Whatever happens, we face it together. The clinical trials began 2 weeks later, and the results exceeded everyone's expectations. Within 3 months, both Emma and Michael were showing significant improvement in their symptoms. Emma's energy levels increased dramatically, her motor skills strengthened, and her cognitive function improved to the point where her teachers were discussing accelerated academic programs. Michael's progress was even more remarkable. The muscle weakness that had defined his daily existence for 3 years began reversing his coordination. Improved, and for the first time since his diagnosis, his doctors began using words like remission and long-term prognosis. It's working, Dr. Chen announced at the 6-month mark, her voice carrying the kind of amazement that reminded everyone why they'd chosen careers in medical research. Both children are responding better than our most optimistic projections suggested. But the real measure of success wasn't found in medical charts or research data. It was found in Emma's laughter as she chased fireflies through their backyard on summer evenings. It was found in Michael's excitement as he submitted his completed novel to publishers. It was found in the dozens of families who traveled to the foundation from around the world seeking help for their children and finding hope in treatments that had been developed through ethical research rather than criminal exploitation. "Daddy," Emma said one evening, as Liam tucked her into bed, "do you think the bad men are sorry for what they did?" The question caught Liam off guard, as Emma's questions often did. "I don't know, sweetheart." "Why do you ask?" "Because I hope they are. I hope they understand that kids aren't supposed to be scared in hospitals. Kids are supposed to feel safe and loved even when they're sick." "You're right," Liam said, his voice thick with emotion. "And because you were brave enough to survive what they did to you, other kids will never have to go through that. You helped save them, Emma. Really, really. You and Uncle Michael and Evelyn, all of you helped make sure that what happened to us won't happen to other families." Emma smiled with the kind of satisfied happiness that came from knowing she'd made a difference in the world. "Good. I like helping people." As the first anniversary of their wedding approached, Evelyn found herself reflecting on the impossible journey that had brought them to this point. 12 months earlier, she'd been a lonely billionaire whose only companion was her dying brother. Now she was a wife, a mother, a researcher whose work was saving children's lives around the world. "Regrets?" Liam asked one evening as they sat on their porch, watching Emma and Michael play in the yard, while the sun set over the Hudson Valley. "Only one," Evelyn replied, surprising him. "What's that?" "I regret that it took a bomb and a kidnapping and a criminal conspiracy for me to meet you," she said with a smile that made his heart skip a beat. "I could have used 34 years of this happiness instead of just one. We've got the rest of our lives to make up for lost time," Liam said, pulling her closer until she was nestled against his side. "Promise, promise." In the distance, they could hear Emma's laughter mixing with Michael's as they discovered fireflies beginning to emerge from the grass. The sound was pure magic, the sound of children who'd been given back their childhoods, of a family that had been forged in fire and sealed with love. Dr. Marcus Vaughn died in federal prison 18 months after his conviction, his illegal medical empire completely dismantled, and his co-conspirators facing their own lengthy sentences. The children he'd experimented on recovered their families, rebuilt their lives, and the treatments developed through legitimate research at the Drake Cross Foundation eventually helped thousands of children around the world. But for Evelyn, sitting on her porch with her husband's arm around her shoulders and the sound of their children's laughter filling the evening air, the real victory wasn't measured in justice served or diseases conquered. The real victory was measured in moments like this, extraordinary, beautiful, perfectly imperfect moments that reminded her that sometimes the greatest love stories begin with the most impossible circumstances. Sometimes when everything seems lost, you discover that what you're really searching for has been right in front of you all along, disguised as danger wrapped in crisis and delivered by someone you never expected to save your life. Sometimes the most powerful woman in the world discovers that her greatest strength comes not from money or influence, but from the willingness to risk everything for love. And sometimes, just sometimes, fairy tales do come true, even in the shadows of warehouses and the depths of storm drains. Even when the prince is a janitor and the princess is a CEO. Even when happily ever after requires fighting monsters and saving children and learning that family isn't defined by blood, but by choice. As night fell over their perfect, imperfect, impossibly beautiful life, Evelyn Cross closed her eyes and listened to the sound of her family's happiness. It was the most valuable thing she'd ever owned, and unlike everything else in her empire, it was something that could never be bought, sold, or stolen. It could only be loved, protected, and cherished for as long as they all shall live. And that, she realized, was exactly long enough.